everyone, my name is Rebecca, and as you can tell, I love 18th century clothing. I've loved it ever since I was very young, and I always dreamed of making myself an 18th century outfit, which I did 2 years ago. Now I'm going to introduce you to this outfit. It is by no means a perfect replica of 18th century clothing. I'll be telling you about the different parts, and then most excitingly I will be going into how I drafted and patterned a pair of stays for myself. Stays are basically like the corset of the 18th century, though they were never called corsets, they were called stays, and they form like the foundation. You cannot do the 18th century style without the stays. For women, it really provided support, it provided the posture, the entire look, and actually they're not uncomfortable at all. They're very comfortable to wear. You feel very at home in it, and women used to wear it to work in the fields, to do a lot of vigorous activities. I guess this outfit starts from the top. I have a cap here. I made it from an online tutorial about 2 years ago. It's not perfect, but it's made from cotton, and I'm going to make a new one to replace it, but I'm very happy with the sort of look of this cap. It feels very 18th century. The minute you put this cap on, you feel like back in time. This is a kerchief. It really should be a very large triangle, but I just basically found a white organza scarf in my mom's closet and I just threw it on because that's how I do things. This dress is what we call a robe l'anglaise. I am very bad at French. I know nothing about French. It's called an English gown, and what happens is that it is closed, and up here it's all like a full, like a blouse or something, and then it's open here. Well, in a lot of cases, English gowns would have been made with the skirt connected right up to the back piece of the bodice, but mine, you can see the bodice ends and the skirt is attached to it. Here it's made from a discontinued IKEA fabric, not entirely accurate to the 18th century because the patterns are very busy. This kind of pattern you mainly see on like Dutch outfits that would have been just the short gown, it's called, so it stops here. It's not the full gown that they would have worn with this kind of fabric. You can get IKEA duvet covers that have very nice 18th century fabrics. Those I would recommend. I will put a link to a website describing different types of IKEA fabrics and duvets you can use to make 18th century clothing. This is what I happened to get. It's relatively inexpensive, and I think it's good enough for the look that I'm going for. So finally, down here we have the petticoat, and it is seen under the gown. There would be like under petticoats, and there will be like an over petticoat. This one I made in one afternoon, and I actually have a tutorial how I sewed it up using an accurate 18th century shape, but using a machine to like get it done real quick because I was really excited to finish this outfit. So today I'm going to be talking about an essential part of my 18th century outfit, which are the stays that I'm wearing underneath. Now I'm wearing an older pair of stays, so I'm going to be showing you my newer pair in a second, but I thought I'd use my little handy miniature to show you what stays do and what they're like. So stays are like the 18th century equivalent of a corset, but they're very different from corsets. They provide a very different shape. So we're not going for hourglass, we're going for like a conical shape, like a cone. So it's meant to just hold you together and give you support. It is actually really good for posture, it's really good for the back. People used to wear stays to work in the fields, to do lots of chores, scrub the floors, everything you could do wearing a pair of stays. So this miniature model is based on a pattern from a pair of stays in the Victoria and Albert Museum, which I got to see firsthand in 2 years ago. Those are pink. Mine is just made out of foam and sewn to just show you what the shape of it is like. This was before I made myself a pair, and I wanted to understand what stays are and what they do. So I made a mannequin, and I made stays for the mannequin. Okay, so we have a front piece here, and a lot of stays are not front lacing, they are back lacing. The front piece is very heavily boned, and usually there's a big wooden piece here called a busk to give you that straightness of figure that was so in vogue during that time. You have very wide chest and shoulder straps that are put as far apart as possible because you want to create a posture where your shoulders are back like that. That's why the arms are always like this. This wide shoulder strap creates that. If there were shoulder straps going over, they would be tied to this point over here. Now I prefer strapless stays because they give a lot more freedom. So I think generally, I guess working class, middle class women who had to work would be wearing stays without the shoulder straps because they really give a lot more freedom to move. So that's what I created here. I guess upper class women, like the gentry, maybe, don't quote me on this, but they would have worn their shoulders pressed into where they should be, pulled back. So we have the idea of broad, pulled back shoulders narrowing towards the waist. That is the look, like an inverted triangle. And that sort of gives you the illusion of a tiny waist when you may not actually have a tiny waist. So the idea with stays is not to press you into a 16-inch waist. If you look up close at 18th century gowns and things like that, the Victorian and Albert Museum or the Bath Fashion Museum, which I really enjoyed visiting this year, you will see people actually had pretty normal figures. Some of them could be quite stout. But the idea, for example, with this is to create a look that you narrow down towards the waist. And also if you're wearing a stomacher gown that makes you look tiny, maybe it's not that tiny. It's the effect. So same thing with the staging. So it will be boned this way, and then when you lace it up, you'll get that look. Around then we have the side pieces, the back pieces, and the back lacing over here. So these are a recent pair of stays that I made for myself from the same fabric. I got 2 meters from IKEA, and because it was 60 inches wide, I had enough to make a gown, pair of stays, and still have leftover fabric. I can do another project with that. So these stays are tiny. If you look at them from the side, they are small. Yeah. I think it's less about a foot wide. So this, they're usually called a pair of stays. I don't know why, maybe because mine a lot were in 2 pieces. Mine are front and back lacing. That I find is just easier for me as a plebeian person who doesn't have servants to help me lace up behind. It's just so much easier. Now the interesting thing about stays is that the tabs make them very different from corsets, and the tabs are kind of a pain. You have to bind these tabs by hand because there's no way you can go around this kind of angle with a machine. So what do tabs do? You know, like a corset, when you have that hourglass figure and the corset smooths out over the hips? Well, the tabs kind of smooth out over the hips because the focus in stays is all about the straight look, the cone. And so the tabs kind of splay out after that to give you room for the hips. They make everything a lot more comfortable. I couldn't imagine wearing stays without the tabs. I've never seen an extant or original pair of stays that didn't have tabs. Correct me if I'm wrong, but those tabless ones came about later when you have the Regency era, where you have the Jane Austen looks that are all very high-waisted. Then yes, your stays don't need tabs because they don't go down to the waist and splay out at the hips. If you didn't have tabs, the danger, and I asked other people who have different types of stays, what would happen if you don't have tabs? Well, one issue is if you have hips, the stays are just going to end here and they're going to dig into your hips when you sit down. It's just rub and chafe and everything, not nice. And it provides support for whatever you're tying on, because most of the undergarments in the 18th century are tied around. So let's say you have the waist here and you have your tabs and they're sitting over your hips, so they splay out and provide like the sort of, tension and release. You would tie on your petticoats, your pockets, like that. They won't slide down. You would tie on your support undergarment, be it some kind of bum roll or panniers, like big hoop skirts of that time, which would have been more wide than deep, but anyway. So you would tie those on as well, and the petticoats are tied on, as you can see in my petticoat tutorial, so there's something to sit on. So let's splay these out a bit. Let's say you've got big, hips, or just any kind of hip. If you have waist, you'll have a hip bone. So this enables whatever you tie to sit nicely just above your hip bone. Okay, so now I'm going to be talking about my stays and how I created my own custom pattern for them using my own measurements. The stays are spiral laced, which is, if you look here, they just go back and forth and back and forth, rather than having two that crisscross each other as you lace down. So it's not the same as a corset. Spiral lacing would have been common in the 18th century, and to be honest with you, I'm actually a lot more comfortable using spiral lacing. It's just a lot more straightforward and easy to lace up. For the pattern itself, my model here has 4 pattern pieces on each side. Well, the front is one piece. So this model, this pair of stays that I have are the same as well. So this is one piece, this is piece 2 and 3 and 4. The very first thing that I did to create this custom shape was to start with a Tudor or Elizabethan stay generator. So if you go to elizabethancostume.net, you will find an online custom corset pattern generator. There are basically 3 steps. You take measurements of yourself, you decide what you want your final measurements to be in terms of like your waist. Then you take a piece of paper and you draw out the pattern that they provide for you. They'll tell you how many inches to do from this part to that part until you come up with one large pattern piece. It will look something like this. Now what I like about this pattern is that it's very customizable and it's a good base for which to create 18th century stays. That pattern generator creates Elizabethan stays which are different from the 18th century stays that I wanted to make in 2 significant ways. First of all, Elizabethan stays come up to here. If you look at Tudor gowns, they are much higher. So what I did was to create a mock-up following the pattern there, and then I put it on, and someone suggested that I trim down the front, so that's what I did. I just put it on, I took a marker, I drew across where I wanted the stays to end. Following pictures of 18th century clothing, you want it to end just above just above the mid boob point. You want it to be lower basically. So I lowered it an inch. After creating my first mock-up, what I did to create the final pair of stays was actually to divide that one piece pattern into 4 pieces. So I have my 4 pieces here to show you. This is piece 1 and 2 and 3 and finally 4. It's taped together. So basically it's just like taking this entire piece and carving it out and drawing the boning lines where I want it to be. Now I based my shape of the pieces on the American Duchess boning pattern blog post. So they have various configurations for different types of different eras that you can do. I didn't follow theirs exactly, but I used like the division of these 4 patterns, and I took my whole piece here and I just sort of took a ruler and measured and decided how I wanted it to be divided up into 4 pieces. That's how I got my 4 pieces. So the generator will give you the general outline, and it's up to you to fill in like how you want your boning channels, to what direction, what angle you want them to be. But what I find really helpful is taking that state pattern generator based on my own measurements and being able to take that as like an outline and being able to fill in, change the tabs, change the height, change the shape by changing the boning channels, adjusting the waist bigger, smaller. It's a process. It's a process of pattern making and making decisions. It's a process of creativity. So if you take a commercial pattern, you'll have to do a mock-up and you'll have to decide what works for you and what doesn't. So for me, having this outline is the same as starting with a commercial pattern. It's probably the same amount of work that I would have to do in terms of customizing it. So I might as well start with that, which is based on my measurements to begin with. And then I don't really have too much to change, but it really depends. So the pair of stays that I'm wearing underneath my dress now are the mock-up stays. They work pretty well. Okay, so on the left we have the mock-up stays based really closely on the Elizabethan custom corset pattern that I got online, and on the right are the final 18th century style stays that I took this and I customized it and I made it more 18th century. So one of the major differences that you can see are the tabs. Here we have 4 tabs in all. Well, if you count the front, then it's 3 tabs on each side. And here we have quite a few more, 5 instead of 3. So to make this, I took a very cheap polyester fabric and I put a strength layer of, I think it was like canvas fabric on the inside. I sewed together the outline for each side. There are 2 sides. I sewed the front and back and the inside together and I flipped it inside out. Then I played around with the boning channels to make it have an 18th century shape. So instead of boning it straight down, like I said, I started with an angle here, I changed it slightly here, so you can see the start of like pattern 1, piece 1, piece 2, piece 3, and piece 4 over here. Like I said, I used hooks and eyes because it made it very easy to take in and out, and it has been changed several times. The first mock-up I did was with Rigeline, which I removed, and later I added in these zip tie boning instead. It's starting to fray, so you can see what's inside. Let's see. Yep, so you can see some of the Rigeline from before, as well as some of the zip ties that I put in. The back was made with really bad like 1-piece eyelets. Again, it was a mock-up, so you can see for the mock-up the easy front closure and the very easy back closure, the lacing, which is with like those cheap craft type eyelets. So you can see here, not very nice pattern pieces at the moment, but yeah. So took this thing, divided it into 4 shapes, roughly based on the American Duchess blog post. That's how I ended up with this. Now for this one, if you want to see what it looks like inside, as you can see, piece 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. I didn't really follow an 18th century construction method when doing this. I used my machine to zigzag the pieces. I used my machine to sew the boning channels, following the guide on my machine. Yep, so hand sewing is a real pain. It's really painful on the fingers to be sewing alongside boning and things like that. I wanted something quick and easy. Plus I used IKEA fabric, a curtain for the back, as well as the Sigrid fabric for the front. The thing of note is that the boning pattern that I created, for example here where you have back and forth, is not based on extant garments. It was something I created on my own based on some pictures of stays, but I was like using more of my own creativity and original ideas in doing the boning than actually following any specific 18th century pattern. That's how I do things. If you look at my petticoat tutorial, I use an 18th century shape, I use an 18th century inspiration, but a lot of this, like the smaller details in terms of the boning or the construction, often I use my own ideas when doing it. Thank you so much for tuning in. I hope you found the video to be helpful. If not, it's just sharing how I happen to create my own pair of stays. It may be very different from how you decide to create your own pair of stays in the future. Hopefully in future videos I'll be able to go into different parts of an 18th century wardrobe and my take on them. For example, the English gown that I have, I might do something about that. So let me know if you're interested in watching something about those. So if you like this video, do like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more. Bye!